Good morning. Many of the presentations after mine involve outside speakers, and in respect for their time, I'm going to try to get us caught up. So I may be speaking quickly. Fortunately, I'm highly caffeinated. I did want to allow our acting medical center director, Robert McHenrick, Mac, to introduce himself. For those who are not aware, Ann Brown has moved on to be the director at the Atlanta VA Medical Center. Mac is our fearless and peerless leader for now, so I did want to give him an opportunity to just say hello.
Just want to say good morning, sir. Welcome to GLA again. I am normally the executive director for clinical care in the community, which is what we have now, 9 CBOCs, 2 ambulatory care centers. So I go from San Luis Obispo to Bakersfield, down into Gardena and East LA. And now out in San Gabriel Valley in the last month, we've opened an interim CBOC there to provide services while we build a new one. So I'm usually in the out base, but for the last 2.5 months, I've been here at GLA carrying the flag, and we expect the director to be announced anytime now and here within the next month or two. So welcome. If there's anything we can do, please let us know. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, my glasses are not readers, so I have the choice of being able to see my notes or you. I'm choosing my notes. Wanted to just very quickly flag what I wanted to talk to you about. Wanted to start with some of our successes because we've had some. Talk a little bit about our updated construction schedule, and when I get to those slides, I'm going to ask Paul McPherson, who is here representing the Office of Asset Enterprise Management, to speak a little bit to the construction schedule for the next phase of housing. Then do want to flag some challenges that we are beginning to see and some proposed solutions, ways to sort of meet and overcome those challenges. All right, first with respect to successes, our chair made a reference to the record of decision in his opening remarks. For those who have not been paying attention, that is the final bureaucratic act that completes our programmatic environmental impact statement process. It has been written, the ROD is written, it's just going through a concurrence process that our agency requires before the secretary or somebody at a very high level signs a document. Any day now, it will be signed, so there are no more wrinkles. It's just the process of getting all the necessary eyes on it before the secretary puts his pen on it. Once that is done, we can then proceed to redevelop the campus without having the need for additional environmental impact due diligence, at least for 10 years. This particular PEIS is good for 10 years. So it's been a long road to get us here, and it's very exciting to be able to get to the point where we can begin to put shovels in the ground and begin work, adaptive reuse of existing buildings and the construction of new ones. That's probably all I need to say on that slide. Except I do want to thank and recognize a lot of people. I have the privilege and sometimes the challenge of standing up before you to represent our integrated project team. You need to know there's a lot of people working very hard, have been working very hard for a period of years now, who are not here, but it's their work that has gotten us to this point. So I want to acknowledge the many, many people. You have heard from Glenn Elliott before. He's the environmental officer in DC who had the lead on the PEIS, but he also represents a very large group of people, and this represents a whole lot of work and a lot of long hours. So do want to reflect on the contributions of everybody who worked to get us here. Also want to talk a little bit about some external partnerships. We have the statutory authority and the money to do some of the work that's going to be necessary to carry out the master plan, but we are also dependent on third-party partnerships to a great extent. You will be hearing later this morning from our principal developer team, the West Los Angeles VA Veterans Collective, who was selected through a competitive process last November, and they have taken the lead on identifying options to carry out the housing element of our master plan, how best to phase and stage and integrate the housing so that we don't have a bunch of one-off buildings that don't operate together as a community. And I think you'll be very pleased and excited to hear their plans. We also are continuing to work in partnership with the LA Metro, the Los Angeles Metropolitan Transit Authority, on their plan to put a Purple Line train station on our campus. For those of you who were late because of traffic, you know how challenging it can be to get here from almost anywhere at certain times of day. And so having the Purple Line allow veterans, employees, guests, others to get here from downtown in 25 minutes consistently rather than the hour and a half that 9-mile drive can sometimes take will be important and very beneficial to people who are working here, living here, receiving care here. So looking forward to completing that work. One other thing that we are looking forward to is finding a way for either the monetary consideration that LA Metro has to pay for the taking of our land and or some in-kind consideration that is an option. We are looking for ways to have that consideration help us to move forward with the housing that we need to be building on this campus. So that partnership is not solely around transportation, but it also allows us to leverage that consideration to complete other work that is necessary as part of our housing. Finally, I do want to flag the continuing partnership that we have with the City and County of Los Angeles around temporary bridge housing. It has been a much harder, longer road than any of us anticipated. For those who are not aware, work began, seemingly simple work, to compact and regrade a currently unimproved portion of our campus to hold this temporary bridge housing facility. Work started in December, and within the first day or two, the contractor hit first a water main and then an underground sewer pipe that contained asbestos. We had to stop work, abate the asbestos. We're now working again, but continue to find things under the ground that are slowing the process. We are all committed to getting it done and getting it done as quickly as we can, while also ensuring that the work proceeds without any public safety hazards. We are now anticipating opening that facility in December, January at the latest, for the benefit of 100 homeless veterans who do need temporary bridge housing while they are waiting to get into permanent housing. Sometimes challenges are the best way to test how good and deep and successful a partnership will be, and suffice it to say, we're real good partners with the city and county going forward. Next, wanted to update you a little bit on the construction schedule. I will acknowledge that nobody can read this chart, including me, but wanted to flag a couple of things that are important milestones. First is that the columbarium expansion, the expansion of the National Cemetery with additional burial options on this side of Sepulveda. There will be a grand opening ceremony on October 5th. Marking the opening of that facility and the availability of a new burial option, given that the cemetery has been full for several decades. So that's a very important and exciting milestone. Also wanted to flag that we will be beginning construction on a replacement kitchen here on the south side of Wilshire. Our current kitchen that serves this hospital is way up at the north side of the North Campus, not remotely convenient. And it's also seismically deficient and very, very old. And so it will be exciting and a real benefit to veterans here in the hospital to have a state-of-the-art new kitchen that is next door to the hospital so that food doesn't get cold on its trip from the kitchen to the hospital. So looking forward to that as well. Paul, did you want to come up and just give a quick update on the housing timeline?
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Paul McPherson, Director of the Enhanced Use Lease Program for VA. I'm the point person working with Principal Developer. Can you hear me? So just to give you a little update on timelines, that's better, thank you. So on this chart that you may have on the slides in front of you, there's two lines that are important to me at least. This is the line 205, and this line to do with 207, which is a little lower down. And just to talk briefly about 207, that's the easiest one of these two. They intend to close on the 207 transaction in the third quarter of 2020. They're in the process of applying for financing and going through that process with the city and the county. And then they hope to deliver units in the second quarter of 2022. So that's a slight, well actually that's actually in line with what you've got on your slide there. So that's how that transaction is moving forward. For the other transaction that we're working on, which is 205 and 208, which we've been working on for a while, they had already been approved for all of their financing much earlier in this year, and they were proceeding towards closure, and the developer team had a new investor come on board as part of the transaction, US Bank, and US Bank asked that there be modifications to the lease. So we've been working through those changes with our lessee, Shangri-La Blue Green, to accommodate US Bank's modifications to the lease. We were getting close to wrapping that up, and then there was the city called up and asked if we could restructure the lease a little bit for the financing applications. Yeah, and so we agreed to do that, and we're in the process of wrapping up those final items. So that transaction is going to close at the end of this quarter, right on the cusp of moving into the fourth quarter. So we're going to try to get that closed in October, and they'll hopefully begin construction in November. So that's a slight change to what you have on your slide there. Back to you.
So one other construction timeline to note is that LA Metro will be beginning its work probably early next year. Their start is actually under the grassy area that is south of Wilshire, west of Bonsall, in front of the quarters homes. So frankly, not much of an inconvenience to anybody except those who live in those homes. And then they won't actually begin work on the main station location, which is the parking lot in front of the hospital, until about a year later. They're tunneling under Bonsall from west of Bonsall, so they're not disrupting people's access to the hospital along Bonsall. Wanted to talk a little bit about some challenges. Paul flagged one of them, and that is the developer financing that is necessary to carry out the delivery of housing through EULs. Our private sector developers look for funding wherever they can find it, and fortunately in Los Angeles that generally consists of money from the city and the county under Proposition H and Triple H, some California state tax credits, and some private sector funding as well. So it's not as simple as going to get a mortgage or a construction loan for a commercial building. It's slightly more complicated because it's different colors of money. And we have found that has thus far resulted in a little bit of confusion and a little bit of delay. The good news is that under Paul's leadership, all of our developer teams, the principal developer team and the developers for buildings 205, 208, and MacArthur Field meet quarterly to talk about, among other things, their experiences getting financing, so that together they can identify best practices, so that going forward this should all be much easier. Nobody's doing anything in a vacuum, and they're learning the tricks that are working for them from each other, which is very helpful. The next challenge I wanted to flag is infrastructure. So as I mentioned with respect to the temporary bridge housing, anytime anybody's going to dig almost anywhere on this campus, they are likely to find relics of a prior phase of all of the buildings that have been here. And on this campus, as probably anywhere else, the practice generally when you move a building or tear one down, you often abandon in place either the utilities infrastructure, perhaps a foundation, and that is the case literally all over this campus. So as the as the developers begin their work of new construction, we can anticipate that there will be other things found under the ground. And so we are looking to do two things. Number one, to understand better exactly what is where. We do have drawings that show where the infrastructure was. We found, at least with respect to the area where the temporary bridge housing is going, that the drawings were not precisely accurate in several respects. One is that over time the ground subsides, or there may have been additional ground placed on top of it. So you may think you know how deep something is, but you find it's not that deep anymore, or it's deeper. And then certainly there are also things that are not exactly placed where we think they are, or they're not the length that the drawings show them to be. So that's something we're seeking to understand better going forward, so that we can learn from the challenges we've had with the temporary bridge housing, and hopefully not encounter that kind of delay with other new construction. The other thing that we're looking to do is to fully understand and strategically address the deficiencies between our current infrastructure from a capacity standpoint, electricity, gas, sewage, and understand what will be needed to support a fully formed community in terms of housing, and get that infrastructure upgrade done now, so the need for it does not delay housing in the future. And one aspect of the meeting among all the developers that Paul led yesterday was a conversation about how do the developers and VA appropriately share the cost of that infrastructure upgrade. We've also been in conversations with VA leadership in Washington, D.C. about ways to get additional money into the mix to support the infrastructure upgrade, to include the potential for the payment from LA Metro for the easement perhaps being something that we can use to upgrade the infrastructure. That would require a change to our statute. Currently, the West LA Leasing Act allows us to keep lease revenues and use them for the renovation and maintenance of the land and buildings here. Lease revenues, as currently phrased in the statute, really does apply only to lease revenues. It doesn't apply to easement consideration. It seems a simple fix to ask Congress to expand the definition of lease revenues to include consideration for an easement. And in fact, our legislative affairs folks in DC are pursuing that request, which would certainly make things easier and bring another chunk of change into the pot to do the infrastructure upgrade. Also talked a little bit about hazardous materials as part of our infrastructure. Just as we know that there are some abandoned utilities underground that have asbestos in them, we also know that the many decades of construction on this campus included things like asbestos, which has long been a standard construction material. And so as we begin to try to adapt existing buildings and go into the drywall, we're likely to find other hazardous materials. Not a problem, not insurmountable, but something that does entail cost and delay. So it is a challenge that we need a strategy to address. This afternoon, Chief Harden's going to talk to you about the security and law enforcement challenges associated with new housing on this campus. The great and wonderful dialogue between VA police, LA County Sheriff, LA City Police, about how do we address that. Once a building is leased and then becomes the private residences of veterans, from a security and law enforcement perspective, the challenge around keeping law and order in it is different than if it is a VA building in which VA care or services are being provided. So we are taking a strategic approach to understanding what the security and law enforcement needs will be going forward, and how we partner with the city and county and with private security companies to ensure that those properties remain safe and are policed in a way that is respectful of the private property rights of veterans living in them. I also talked a little bit about these quarterly meetings that the EUL developers have been having. I think we flagged yesterday that there may be a need in the short term to have them meet more often, so that they can work through how best to coordinate their work, so that we do have a community that feels like a community, and that there isn't a different level of service or different ways to measure the effectiveness of service from building to building. We want it to be a seamless opportunity for veterans who may, as they age and develop different needs, may end up moving from one building to another, and we don't want them to feel that there is any kind of degradation in the quality of their experience based on the building that they're in. That's going to require coordination and sort of shared ownership of metrics and of quality commitments among the developers. Not an insurmountable challenge at all. It's frankly delightful to me to be in the room with them and hear them all. They all share the same commitment to providing quality housing for our veterans, and so what might have been a fraught conversation in a different context is not fraught at all. Everybody is committed to finding the best way to proceed and to measure success. Wanted to flag a little bit about the 2019 point-in-time count, homelessness count here in LA County. A caveat, these slides are not mine. They're not VA slides, they're the county slides. But they're very pretty, and they do show a lot of data pretty easily, so I stole them. So sue me. I didn't, actually. I told them I was going to use them. So, first and foremost, the overall homeless count in Los Angeles County continued to rise precipitously. Almost 60,000 people are homeless, were homeless on a particular night in January here in LA County. For context, for those of you who are from the DC area, that's as if every home in Bethesda, Maryland suddenly disappeared and everybody who lived in Bethesda was living on the street. For those of you who don't live in Bethesda but maybe closer to college age, that's the entire student body at Ohio State University. It's a lot of people to be homeless. The somewhat good news is that the total number of veteran homeless stayed about the same year over year. A little bit less, but by about 12 people or 17, not a large change. The less good news buried in that number is we housed about 2,500 homeless veterans last year. So we're staying the same, but we are housing a lot of people, which means there are every year a significant number of new veterans falling into homelessness. This is the veteran homeless slide. And we also, fortunately, know a little bit about why. And it's the same reason for both homeless veterans and homeless non-veterans, and that is the continued widening gap between average income in Los Angeles County and average rent. So the average individual working in LA County needs to work an 80-hour week to afford the average one-bedroom home, or if they're working a 40-hour week, they have to be making about $50 an hour, which is frankly not the reality for most people. So there are lots of people, veterans included, who've been able to hang on to housing. Maybe they have a fixed income, maybe they are working, but they are not making $50 an hour or working 80 hours a week. And as the rents continue to climb, they eventually do fall into homelessness. So there's two things that are going to need to happen, both county-wide and with respect to what we're doing to combat veteran homelessness, at least two things that are going to need to change. One is that we need a lot more affordable housing, not just on this campus, but throughout the county. We have had conversations before in this room and will continue to have them. I think the principal developer will speak a little bit to the issue as well. What's the right number of units of housing to put on this campus? Shouldn't we have one for every homeless individual in LA County? I think the answer is it's not that simple. It's a big county, and not everybody who is homeless in this county wants to live, who is a veteran, wants to live on the west side. Many of them do. It's a desirable place, but if they have family or a job opportunity in another part of the county that makes it very difficult to get to work or to maintain that community connection living here, then we don't want to say that the only option they have is to live on our campus. So it's hard math to work through. Equally important to building additional affordable housing countywide is we need to attack that income discrepancy, the gap between average earnings and the cost of rent. The good news is that on the VA side, we already have some really fabulous programs. PJ Steigers, who's in the audience today is in charge of our homeless employment programs. And we have a number of innovative and very effective things going on that can assist veterans who are interested in getting new job skills that can increase their earning potential. They can get themselves trained and certified and connected to job opportunities that may be of interest to them and for which they are qualified. So already a lot of really good stuff going on. We are talking about ways to increase the throughput of those, and also use the best practices that we've learned in a couple of occupation classifications and expand them to other types of jobs. So we are looking to do that. Those of you who've read every keystroke in our draft master plan know that it contemplated something called an enterprise district, which is an area on our campus in which that training and those job opportunities will be located. I think it's a yes and. We need an enterprise district, but we also need a community-wide, county-wide enterprise program so that veterans, wherever they are, who have not yet fallen into homelessness, can access that opportunity to increase their earning potential so they stay housed. And so we're excited to be working toward that with a lot of great community partners.
Megan, a question for you.
Yes.
John Hopper. Is there a concept in Los Angeles of rent control? I've been passing a note here and heard rent stabilization. Can you speak to that at all?
Not with a tremendous knowledge base. There certainly are towns within LA County, cities within LA County that have been known for their rent control. What that tends to do is creates a situation where somebody who has the benefit of a rent control department never leaves it until they die. So that rather than truly increasing the availability of affordable housing for people who don't have a home, it has a tendency to depress the turnover. But the city and county both are looking at innovative ways to increase the availability of affordable housing. So the city and county are both working on adaptive reuse of a number of underutilized hotels and motels around town that will be reserved as affordable housing, not in the sort of traditional sense of rent control, but in that they must serve, I think in most cases it's 85%, Mr. Mangano may know, they are reserved, a particular percentage of them can only be used as affordable housing as that is defined in the local law. All right, any other questions on that topic?
So, in LA County,
Say who you are.
Hello. Leticia Colchado with County of Los Angeles Homeless Initiative. So in Los Angeles County, there are various cities within the county that have declared rent stabilization ordinances. LA County has also, the Board of Supervisors, supported and advocated at the statewide level for rent stabilization. And in all of the unincorporated areas of the county, they've also placed an ordinance on rent stabilization across the county.
Leticia, for those who might not understand the difference between rent stabilization and rent control, maybe you could talk briefly about that.
So I am not the expert, and I can probably follow up with some additional information. But I think it's placing caps on the amount of that the rent increase can be on an annual basis. And we're looking at some tenant protections as well, having cause for eviction. Within the county, we've also, just through our homeless initiative and Measure H funding, done a great deal of work around prevention and eviction prevention. So there's legal services afforded to people who are at risk of homelessness and being evicted, without cause. And so we are also providing that kind of assistance. And I can get more details. Sure.
Okay, I'm going to power through because I see our next presenters are here and I want to be respectful of their time. Already did talk about the challenges that we are seeing with respect to infrastructure. Also did want to flag for the board, because you've been paying attention to it, we do owe our Office of the Inspector General our final update on the things that we have done in response to the recommendations they provided in the September 2018 report. Our final response is due at the end of September 2019, and we will meet that deadline. Just finally wanted to flag a couple of recommendations that I have forwarded to VA Central Office leadership to help us with the challenges. The first I alluded to a little bit earlier, which is a legislative amendment that would allow the consideration that we expect to get from LA Metro to be used in the same way as lease revenue to upgrade our infrastructure here. It's a critically important thing that has to happen, and in my opinion anyway, that's a relatively minor change to our statute that would allow us to proceed much more quickly to deliver housing. And then finally, we've been talking about ways to increase the cadence of secretary or deputy secretary level oversight of our work. Our IPT members regularly do update the secretary and the deputy secretary and the undersecretary for health on our work. But as of yet, our initiative is not part of any regular and recurrent secretary level oversight. And there are a few mechanisms for that in VA, and I have asked that the folks who are responsible for those processes consider including our initiative in that level of oversight. It is complex enough, it involves enough different parts of VA, it is high dollar value enough, and most critically, it has such an urgency and a moral imperative that I believe it warrants oversight the same way that any national level initiative within VA that crosses organizational lines is overseen. Yes. And I know that this board and Dr. Davis in particular are very quick to pass along information. I just would like to see, frankly, what I was accustomed to with some other initiatives I was involved in prior times in my career, where I had to go in and tell the deputy or the secretary every 2 weeks how I was doing, and that served as a forcing function to make sure that I was doing what I was supposed to do from day to day, week to week. Not that anybody involved in our IPT isn't, it just that level of oversight, in my experience, proves to be very effective with any initiative that crosses organizational lines. So, any other questions for me? Yes, sir.
Good morning, Rob Beglin of the board. I had a question related to the community plan. You explained to us that once the record of decision is published approving the environmental impact, that the principal developer is going to submit a community plan. So I wanted to know, I guess, two things. One is, what's the expected form of the community plan? In other words, what type of details is it supposed to provide? And then second, what's the approval process within the VA?
So I'm going to answer the last question, but I'm going to let the principal developers answer your first question since they're up next. The approval process it's multi-step. So first and foremost, we need to get veteran and community input on it. What the principal developer team will provide is a proposal. It's a draft proposal that needs lots of eyes, lots of input from providers of supportive housing, from local GLA staff, most critically from veterans and other stakeholders here. And then that input plus the proposal would go up through the IPT to the secretary for approval.
And then on the first question, which is the form of the community plan, I realize we're working in a novel area here. Does the original RFQ, or does anything define the scope of the community plan?
I do think, frankly, the principal developer folks who are standing back there and who are scheduled to be standing here right now can do a better job answering your question.
Okay.
I can tell you what the RFP or RFQ said, but they can tell you what they've been working on, which I think is going to be more satisfying to you.
And then one other question. You said that with respect to the Office of the Inspector General, that the campus plans to agree with, I think, 3 or 4 of the recommendations, but that there was one you plan to take exception to.
Already did take take exception to, and I would just refer you back to the IG report itself is published, and the VA's response to it is part of the published report. But in essence, there were 3 particular findings with respect to third-party land uses that our lawyers deemed to be legally incorrect or based in a misinterpretation of the law. And in one case, it was actually a factual situation in that the IG's analysis seemed to be that the West LA Leasing Act, which says what the Secretary of Veterans Affairs can and cannot do with the campus, controlled over the Department of Interior's lease for the oil well. And just from a practical perspective, VA cannot, we don't have any authority to invalidate or change another agency's agreement. But if you are curious about exactly what the agency's response was, I would refer you to the report itself. It's right there. Okay, so with that, I'm going to say thank you very much and take my seat.